Welcome to the World of Rare Disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. My name is Lisa Deck, and I am a rare disease patient, a Rare New England board member, and your host for today's show. Today, our guest is Rich Horgan, the founder and president of Cure Rare Disease. He has a deep passion for Duchenne Multiple Dystrophy and other rare diseases. With a younger brother impacted by the disease, Rich has a strong interest in accelerating promising treatments for that disease. Today, we are going to learn about Rich's personal story and the creation of Cure Rare Disease. I'm thrilled to have you here today, Rich. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Well, great. We are going to jump right in. I was hoping you can tell me, what is Cure Rare Disease?
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to, Lisa. So Cure Rare Disease is really an organization that's been driven by a desperate necessity. My younger brother, Terry, that you alluded to, was diagnosed with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy over 20 years ago. Duchenne is a rare disease, and for your listeners who may not be familiar, it's really a nasty disease that's characterized by progressive muscle loss and weakness, and ultimately is a fatal disease. Right now, there are a couple treatments out for specific parts of the population, and my brother falls well outside of that specific coverage area that those drugs are for, as do many boys and young men with the disease. And so I started Cure Rare Disease as an effort to develop a tailor-made or customized therapeutic for Terry using the latest technology out there. What we formed is a collaboration of researchers, clinicians, and other supportive facets of the team, regulatory expertise, manufacturing expertise, all around the mission of developing this tailor-made therapeutic. We started this journey back in 2018, and I'm proud to say that we're in the last stretches of dosing Terry. But the journey is just getting started from there, really. Behind Terry, there's a slew of other boys and young men, most of whom are impacted by Duchenne, that we're developing tailor-made treatments for. We just really strongly believe that because of a rare mutation or an inability to fit very stringent inclusion and exclusion criteria, that shouldn't be a death sentence for those people.
Right. Well, that sounds amazing, and that seems to be very cutting edge when you're looking at, very specialized treatment. Tell me a little bit about your brother and what it was like growing up with him.
Happy to. Yeah, it's I appreciate the question. So Terry and I were sort of your average upstate New York kids growing up. Upstate New York is a very rural, hilly kind of place. If anybody's visited there that's listening, it's generally wine country. So Terry and I spent a lot of time together growing up. We were and continue to be super avid Star Wars fans, and so playing the video games together, watching the movies together was a real bonding experience for us, and it's one that I really look back fondly on. My parents had a small business growing up and continue to do so. So my brother and I would help out at their small convenience store in upstate New York, stocking shelves and cleaning things like, kids with nothing to do in the summer would. But otherwise, it was if not for Duchenne, it was a relatively, normal childhood, I would say. We became a very close family because there's only the four of us, and we had this family business that sort of united us. But as Terry started to get older, it started to become much more obvious that Duchenne was a real threat to him. When, at least from my perspective, when you're a little kid, you don't really recognize disease. You don't really recognize what it means to kind of be, quote unquote, different. But as I became a teenager and as Terry trailed behind me for 4 years, it started to become obvious that Terry didn't run or walk like quote unquote other kids, that he needed a little bit of extra help. And, as I started to kind of, I guess, mentally develop, for lack of a better term, it became obvious that this was a problem and that this was going to be a serious threat to Terry. And as time went on, we sort of would have glimpses of hope. This drug is moving into clinical trial. This drug is moving into clinical trial. All of those hopes were, eventually would rise and then be dashed as a clinical trial would fail, or Terry wasn't amenable and then it would fail. And so it was sort of this, the beginning of the roller coaster was really, really very much so a thing as we were growing up.
Right. Wow. I just have one brother, and I can imagine how that must feel. the question I have too is at what point was he diagnosed? I mean, you said it probably like in his early teen years, you started recognizing, and was there any indication prior to that? And I know that I asked this question because in the rare disease space, there is definitely always that talking about diagnostic odyssey and things falling behind there.
Very much so. So fortunately or unfortunately, Terry was actually diagnosed with Duchenne when he was only 3 years old. My mother and her three brothers, her three brothers were all impacted. And although genetic screening had led, as I understand it, my family to believe that everything was okay, it turned out not to be. And so Terry was diagnosed at 3. Symptoms didn't really significantly start to manifest until he was 7, 8, 9. You can start to see the hypertrophy in the calves. But as a kid, you don't really recognize that, right? You're like, oh, he has good calves. But as symptoms get more serious and as you start to see night braces come out and more doctors visits, although I was just kind of a kid, it starts to kind of set off that sixth sense, for lack of a better term, that something's not quite right here.
Right. And did you go into a field? Did you study a field that could lead you to where you are today? I mean, how, you kind of are changing the world. And was that because of your brother?
So I appreciate the kind sentiment that we're changing the world here. I did not. I went into a field of business, actually, in my background. I sort of had the thought that, well, I don't think I'm smart enough for science, but I think I can be really good at business, right? So my parents' convenience store, their car washing business, was indirectly, I guess, sort of the first training ground of, okay, it's time to get ready for this. And of course, I didn't know that. But I think my initial intention was to go into business, try to make a lot of money, and then send that capital to something that was going to directly help Terry. As time went on, I started to find myself now in fall 2016, a number of years later, having the opportunity to go to Harvard Business School, and it became obvious that wasn't going to be a viable plan because Terry didn't have that much time. At the time I entered, I was, I think, 23, 24. And so my brother was, 19 or 20 years old. The amount of time that would have taken just was insufficient. So it was at that point, after a particularly bad fall one day, as I was in Boston, that I realized, okay, we need a different strategy. And so I started to immerse myself in really everything drug development. I contacted as many researchers as I could possibly find and who would answer me. I spoke with anybody and everybody just to understand, okay, what's going on here? Getting down to really the brass tacks of the drug development ecosystem. Is anything under development going to help my brother in reasonable time? And that answer was actually no. A lot of the clinical trials are very strictly geared towards younger patients for whom symptoms haven't manifested. Whether that's good or bad is more so a subjective perspective, of course. But for me, that was a very bad thing. And so I was like, okay, we need a different plan. And fortunately, with having that at hbs.edu email, it was one that was able to open a few doors for me that otherwise would not have been open. One of those doors was a close mentor and dear friend of mine, Jonathan Fleming, who teaches a great class at MIT about life science entrepreneurship. And through Jonathan, I was able to meet Dr. Tim Yu at Boston Children's Hospital in 2017, who, as we all now know, was working on a custom oligonucleotide, different technology than we're using, but the same concept of customizing it to a little girl with Batten disease. And so I picked up on that quickly. Dr. Yu wasn't a DMD doc, or a Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy doc by training. So while I could try to emulate his process, I needed to build my own team. And that's exactly what I did.
Excellent. So this is the question for all of the lay people who are watching this. What exactly is a customized therapeutic? Because that's what
Sure.
Sounds like you are developing. And I'd love to have that explanation, not just for myself, but for the viewers as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Happy to answer that, and happy to bring enlightenment to it as best as I can. So the idea of a customized therapeutic, right? We all have different genetics, even within the same disease class, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. It's very rare to find two exactly same patients. And so with that being said, given for the potential to really I don't want to use customize or tailor make, but given the potential to modify a technology down to an individual's genome, we're able to do that now. And we're able to do that with some modalities, right? We're able to do that with CRISPR, which is what we're using, genome editing. We're able to do that with antisense oligonucleotides. A lot of neurodegenerative diseases are seeing the application of those ASOs, as they're abbreviated, to those diseases. But the idea is that we can actually interpret an individual's genetic profile and then start to tailor or customize the CRISPR therapeutic to that individual's genetic mutation, thereby hopefully remedying that genetic mutation and resulting in a meaningful improvement in the individual's quality of life. That's what we mean by customized therapeutic, and that's what we've done with Terry. Each patient has a different strategy. Of course, with my brother's exon 1 deletion, will have a different strategy than a patient with, a deletion of 45 to 50 exon on the dystrophin gene. So that's the idea, that we can tailor make or sort of direct this therapeutic to a different part of the genome based on the individual's mutation is really what we mean by customized. Think tailor-made soup.
Right, great. I have so many questions that just came to my mind, but I will stick to some of the basic ones.
Fire away.
So,
I'll do my best.
Can you tell me about the success? So it sounds like you're having some success. Or maybe actually, why don't we first start with some of the trials, because I'm sure you've had that, some of the struggles you've had over the past couple of years, and then we can get into the success. I think kind of just making it real for people, I think, helps.
For sure, yeah. I mean, to be totally honest, when we started this out in early 2000, late 2018, I should say, we didn't know if this would work. We'd started to see, good signs from Dr. Yu's program having success, but it's a different disease, it's a different modality, and it's very much so almost apples to oranges. And so, some of the challenges were, where do we start and where do we go next? And so we started just one step at a time. We started with first, well, we need to understand and really characterize Terry's mutation beyond sort of your traditional genetic report. Okay, so we need a muscle biopsy. We did the muscle biopsy in October 2018, I believe. And then that analysis went to, well, the muscle biopsy was done at UMass Memorial under Dr. Brenda Wong, who's one of the world's leading Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy docs. Can't say enough good things about Dr. Wong and her team. From there, the muscle biopsy and the analysis went to Yale School of Medicine under the direction of Dr. Monkolek. Again, another incredible researcher in the field. I can't sing Monkel's praises enough. He's impacted by a neurodegenerative disease, or excuse me, a neuromuscular disease as well. And so it really lines up the incentives there, that what we're going after is more than a publication. We're going after tangible results. And so by April of 2019, Dr. Leck had shown proof of principle at actually upregulating the dystrophin in Terry's cells, which was incredibly exciting. To see that, although just an early proof of principle, was really inspiring. It provided us now an avenue to try to fight back. For years you kind of spend the game, how do we delay, how do we slow, sort of this, you're losing, but how do we kind of slow the losing process? And that's not my idea of a good time. I really hate losing. And it's just not in, just not something I enjoy. Not that anybody does, but I don't know, maybe it's just a hyper competitive nature. So by that time, showing the results in the lab, okay, there's an infrastructure there to do that, that's not terribly, uncommon. From the next step is where it got more interesting. Okay, so we've shown proof of principle. We know we want to get this to Terry. What's the regulatory process look like? What's the preclinical process look like? And that's really where Charles River came in, our collaborator with Charles River Labs. Incredible group under the direction of Dr. Lauren Black and Dr. Keith Sutton. Between Lauren and Keith, they helped us to paint a robust enough preclinical roadmap that would see us through our first pharmacology experiment to the FDA in October of 2020 for a pre-IND meeting. And then now we're just wrapping up manufacturing of the human grade drug. And so, where there was this, well, what do we do? Initially has now been replaced with, okay, this is our path, this is our infrastructure, these are our collaborators. It's now had the FDA's perspective put on it, not only in the case of the specifics of my brother's drug and the preclinical and clinical plan there, but more so the infrastructure, the idea that for patients who are very rare, who have very rare mutations, or who are amenable to traditional drug development, whether that's an experimental clinical trial or an approved drug, we now have this roadmap where we're able to actually customize something for an individual and take it through the preclinical and regulatory processes, and ultimately results in something that's from bench to bedside based on the individual. Early days though, early days. We're just getting started.
No, I mean, it's early days, but knowing the little bit I know about drug development and FDA approval and all of that, it's remarkable to see how quickly this moved. So I think having that competitive nature, the desire not to lose, and the drive, nice work, very impressive. Tell me how this can apply to others going forward. What does this mean? This seems like an amazing step. What does it look like for the future of other patients or for cure rare disease?
Absolutely, yeah, it's a great question. It's one that we've thought quite a bit about. So for us, we're entering, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the final stages of taking Terry's drug through manufacturing, IND approval, and then dosing him later this year. Behind Terry, we're working on over 10 other patients with unique mutations on the dystrophin gene. We've also started a neurodegenerative program to try to take the same process, but apply it to a different disease. So if you kind of think of it as a relay race, if instead of the beginning runner is our DMD researcher at Yale, can we switch out that, quote unquote, runner for a different disease expert, a different principal investigator working on a different rare disease? And so far, that answer appears to be yes, that the neurodegenerative program is much earlier than our DMD program. But the idea that we can scale not only from one to many within Duchenne, but from Duchenne to a different disease, is that something we really want to prove out, ultimately driving towards a really robust regulatory framework as the FDA grapples with, okay, how do we deal with single patients? How do we deal with drugs that may be designed for an individual, but may be amenable to more individuals? Where do we draw the posts around that? And so a lot of this is very nascent, and this thinking is very recent, but the FDA is very aware. The FDA is advancing thinking around that. They've released some higher level guidelines, I think, earlier this year as it relates to CDER, so drug development, and that would apply towards antisense oligos. But that's where we want to take it. Beyond drug development, what we really envision building is an ecosystem. An ecosystem with, of course, drug development at its core, being tailor-made to individuals or small groups of individuals, but also supported by a reimbursement framework that allows us to do this, but on a bigger scale. I think it's important that payers need to realize that, yes, there are a few rare disease patients, there are a few within each disease in all likelihood. And so the issues of how do we help these patients too come to mind. Rare disease patients are extremely, extremely, extremely expensive on the healthcare system. I believe a study cited, if I'm not mistaken, an NIH funded study cited that I believe DMD cost the system, the healthcare system in direct cost over $8 million over the course of the patient's life. And so, if we're seeing this drug development cost for around 2 million, what does that argument look like to say, and to convince Medicaid or other private payers, okay, we can reimburse pieces of this. We never expect to have research reimbursed, but what does it look like to reimburse hospitalization costs? That's something that many payers are familiar with, and in fact, already reimbursing. What does it look like to reimburse the actual cost of the drug itself going into the patient? That's one of our highest line items in terms of expenses. And so these conversations are early, but this is now that we've sort of reached this stage of approaching the dosing of our initial patient, bringing on other patients. This is something that we need to grapple with, and that as a community at large, we need to grapple with. There are other great groups out there that are working on customized ASOs. NLORM Foundation is one. Dr. Neil Schneider's work out of Columbia with his ASO to treat a subset of ALS patients is another. These patients are patients that need help urgently. And so, we need to, I don't know if I want to say rethink, because that sounds a little naive, but I think we need to reconsider or potentially think creatively about how as a community and a population in the country do we try to pay for these things. Right now, Cure Rare Disease raises all the money, and thankful for our partnerships with our corporate partners, our partnerships with organizations like Columbus Children's Foundation and ViralGen, which help us produce AAV at a more approachable price. And so, this is great for the short term, But in the long term, I really do believe it is up to the payers to take a strong consideration of this, and not even just the payers themselves. I hate to throw just the buck onto the payers like most companies do, but I think there are creative mechanisms out there for organizations like pharma or bio to consider. I think drug development often gets a bad rap in industry, but here is a chance where we can help people who have traditionally been forgotten because they're too few. What does it look like to try to support the development of customized drugs for populations that are just too rare? At the end of the day, we're not trying to replace pharma. We're simply trying to be another tool in the toolbox of drug development that is geared towards patients who have been traditionally forgotten.
Right. And I know from the perspective of patients, I think having another tool is what is needed and when wanted, especially for some of these very rare cases. Wow, I'm just so blown away, to be honest, about this technology. It's just not something I know about, so I'm very excited to hear about it. Thank you for sharing. So tell me, what's the next step for your brother, and what's next for CRD, I guess, just in terms of your brother? What are the next steps for him?
Absolutely. So Terry's getting excited, right? I think this journey has been about 2 or 3 years that we've been on now, and it's been a very, very difficult one. I'm really grateful for our partners, our collaborators, for the success we've had. But Terry's ready. Terry's ready to get this drug. We message often back and forth since I'm in Boston and he's in New York. What's the timeline looking like? So we are finishing up manufacturing. I've got such an appreciation for the complexity behind manufacturing of these advanced therapies, gene therapies. It is difficult. It is very complex. It is very difficult, and it's in its early stages. Using AAV to deliver these therapeutics is not the best tool, but it's the best tool we've got right now. We know it'll be better in the future. But in the meantime, as we finish up manufacturing Terry's drug, we'll move into our final study here in just a couple months, around May, June. That'll be our last safety study. In parallel, we'll prep the IND package for the FDA, building off of our pre-IND package. And so toward the fall time, we should be looking at submitting an IND for dosing Terry. Praying that everything goes well in terms of the last studies that we've got lined up. So we'll see. We're just keeping our focus really, really tight on executing what we do, which is developing drugs for individual patients. I think it really just comes down to relentless execution towards the mission, and just persistence at advancing this. So that's what's next for Terry. Cure Rare Disease is on the same path, of course. We're developing also in the background. I mentioned drugs for other kids with Duchenne. We've got 2 drugs different from Terry's that are going into preclinical that have gone into preclinical development, I should say, in 2021. Behind them, we're now generating 5 other drugs behind that. And so kind of just rinse and repeat now that we have a structure, we know how to do it, and also starting to build in the know-how and the expertise on the team to start to navigate some of those farther down the line issues. Reimbursement, for instance, is a next big target of ours. And so, I love the work that Every Life Foundation is doing in terms of trying to really illustrate and illuminate the challenges that rare disease patients face, especially the cost. And so, how do we get others to look at this in the same vein of light, to start to consider or want to look deeper into reimbursing these types of drugs for the betterment of not only humanity, but also the economic argument that, if we can avoid a subset of these expenses for patients down the road, then that's a great thing for everybody involved.
Right. Excellent. Interestingly, I'm on some calls with Every Life this afternoon lobbying our legislators. So yes, they are doing great things for our community. So I have one final question. If somebody wants to learn more about Cure Rare Disease, I'd love for you to direct them where to go. And if you have any final words for our viewers about Cure Rare Disease.
Absolutely. So for your viewers, encourage them, if they're interested in learning more, to go to our website, which is cureraredisease.org. We're all over social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and they can go to those pages as well. All of our handles are at Cure Rare Disease for those platforms. If the part of your audience that is more geared towards gaming is interested, we've taken a big effort into esports. That's a whole separate conversation, but an opportunity for people who are differently abled or have different physical abilities to all compete around sort of an equalizing force being gaming. And encourage folks to reach out and learn more in that regard. But very, very pleased to be able to share the story of what we're doing, and really the hope that it acts as a framework for others across the world and across the country to try to help their loved ones as well.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for being part of this. It's really a pleasure to have you here, and I really appreciate it. Before closing, I want to just do a review of our show and just talk about where you can find this show. The show will be living live on YouTube, on the Rare New England YouTube channel, and shared on our social media channels as well. Part of our show includes the Rare New England in Motion segment. This show will be showcased live on Rare New England's Facebook page on April 5th, 2021. Viewers are able to tune in live to watch a video of this recording, as well as talk to guests and members of the Rare New England team. We would love for you to reach out to us with any questions. Send an email to info@rarenewengland.org, and we will include it in our show. Rare New England in Motion is the perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. From all of us here at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, and then think zebras. Thank you.